Jesus said to the disciples, "The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, 'You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right.' And so they went. When he went out again about noon, and about 3 o'clock, he did the same. And about 5 o'clock, he went out and found others standing around, and he said to them, 'Why are you standing idle here all day?' And they said to him, 'Because no one has hired us.' So he said to them, 'You also go into the vineyard.' When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, 'Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first.' When those hired around 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, 'These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat.' But the landowner replied to one of them, 'Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous?' So the last will be first, and the first will be last." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Technical difficulties. So today we continue kind of the lectionary sermon series of basically conflict. Oh, darn it, he's going to talk about conflict again. Conflict and God's grace. If you weren't here the last 2 Sundays, we'll do catch-up, just like we do in shows. If you haven't watched the last 2 shows, they catch you up, to remind you even, because we all slept since then. It's a couple of weeks ago, Jesus was talking about how to do conflict mediation. Basically, it's that part in Matthew where Peter asks, how many times are we supposed to forgive somebody? Just once, twice, if at all. And is it possible that there is some sin that somebody does to you that is unforgivable? And Jesus basically says, you forgive them 7 times 70. Basically, Jesus rolled his eyes at Simon Peter again and said, there is no limit to forgiveness. And Jesus outlined kind of that process of what we should all be doing. You first go to that person that you have a conflict with, and you talk to them personally, and it doesn't get resolved there, then you bring in mediators, bring in 2 or 3 people to help you work through the issues, to make sure that everybody is arguing and discussing well, because God is there at all times, not only in the good times, but also when we are in the midst of conflict and arguing. And how do you want to argue before God? And then if resolution doesn't happen when 2 or 3 are with you, then you take it to the church, you take it to the community, and you have the community adjudicate to help with the process. But the main point that Jesus was making is that there is no limit to forgiveness, just as there is no limit to God's grace. Last week, we took that a little bit further, talking about this concept of forgiveness. What is forgiveness? how do we forgive? And one of the main points in that is that forgiveness is kind of that manifestation that we are able to do as people who are participating in God's mission in the world. God's mission in the world, which is, do you remember? What is God doing through Jesus Christ? Reconciling all things to God. Let's get that in really good. Make sure. What is God's mission?
Reconciliation.
All things to God. All things. And so forgiveness is this methodology, this point where all the pain and the anger and everything that we feel that we have been, many times justified for the pain and the anger. That forgiveness is that point where we are released from being captive and held prisoner by the pain and the suffering and the injustice. And we move to that point where we are able to engage the other person. And forgiveness is something that you not only give, but you also receive. It is about both parties that are in conflict, that are, for a moment, setting aside what they each think that they deserve or what they believe, so that they can actually talk and listen and hear what each are saying. Forgiveness is the point of engaging so that we may all participate in the mission of God, which is
Reconciliation.
all things to God. So today, we go to the next point. And this is, we're kind of going from big idea to the two people listening to each other, being able to forgive. Now we're actually going to, what is it that we're actually setting aside, or what are we putting to the side? How do we do that in order to get to that point of forgiveness so that we can engage each other? And this is where Jonah and the landowner comes into play. Out of the Bible, there are two parts that I like, that I'm drawn to, that I really like. In the New Testament, the Greek scriptures, it is Luke and Acts, because I like history, and Luke is a historian. He's very particular about doing history. The other one, in the Hebrew scriptures, is this book, the book of Jonah. It is a wild and crazy story. And there's a lot about Jonah that I identify with. Here is Jonah, who is this guy, just, an Israelite, a good Jewish guy. And God says, Jonah, I got a job for you. I am calling you out. I'm calling you, and I'm giving you a word. I'm giving you a mission. Here, Jonah, is how you are going to help me in reconciling all things to God. And so, Jonah gets this mission. Go to Nineveh. Wait, Jonah says, the Ninevites are not Israelites. I thought they were not your people. Don't worry about that, Jonah. Here's your mission. Go and tell the Ninevites to turn back, to turn to me, to turn and listen to what I say so that they can have life. And if they say that they're not going to do it, tell them it's life or death. Their choice. And Jonah goes, are you sure? And so Jonah kind of thinks about it, and eventually he starts rocking, and he's conflicted. He's battling this whole issue about going to the Ninevites. Is Jonah going to the Ninevites, to share this message? Is he afraid of what might happen to him if he starts getting into the square and telling the Ninevites that the God of Israel tells you to turn back, to turn and watch? He's probably thinking, I'm going to die. So either I can die by not following God, or I can die by going to the Ninevites and preaching this word that God tells me to do. And then there's also just what he feels about the Ninevites. Doesn't like them. To Jonah, Ninevites are not worth saving. He doesn't understand what God is doing. He doesn't care why God is going to save the Ninevites. He says, reconcile or not, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. And Jonah runs, and he runs, and he runs, but God chases after him and keeps poking him and saying, choose, Jonah. You can either do this mission or keep running. Choose. Choose. You can do what I asked you to do, or you can continue to suffer with your decision not to do what I am asking you to do. And it even goes into that whole scene of Jonah being swallowed by a whale. Great imagery. St. John of the Cross, I believe, has a really good interpretation of that. It's that part where we are so captive by our anger and frustration and what we feel that people deserve and what our judgment is of other people, that we come to this part of complete darkness, that we are swallowed by the darkness, that we are swallowed by our anger, that we are swallowed by hate. We are held captive in the belly of a whale, the dark night of the soul, St. John says. But God is there. Jonah relents, and he's freed. And he goes. He goes to Nineveh, puts on the sackcloth, as is the custom, puts some ash on his face, stands in the middle of the square, looking at all these people, and says, not very loud, hey, turn back. God wants you to turn around, follow the God of Israel. Otherwise you all go, yay, Jonah. But it was amazing. After he just said that, without any feeling or compassion or empathy, the people actually did it. I mean, it was like wildfire. Everybody then turns. The Ninevites, they started going to their knees and they started weeping and crying and asking for forgiveness from God. And they started to become reconciled with each other and with God. And this is then where we pick up in the reading today, is that Jonah is watching all this and going, what? Why? They don't deserve it. They're Ninevites. They're not human. Why is God showing favor to them? If I was God, they'd be destroyed. I want to die. This is not right. I'd rather die than see the Ninevites being forgiven and shown grace by God. And so then Jonah stumps out of the city and goes, hangs out on a hill, pouting, being self-reflective. But God is still there too. God never makes Jonah change his mind or change his perspective. God is there constantly poking at Jonah, asking him, why is this an issue for you? Why do you care? I'm the one that cares. Are you, Jonah, envious because I have shown grace to these people? Is that also not what Jesus, the landowner, says in Jesus' parable? It's basically the same thing. There are people there that feel that they deserve something, that they have a judgment. They make a decision on what is right and what is not right. And they throw a temper tantrum. They get so filled up with what they think should happen that they forget about the landowner, and that the landowner is the one that is giving the wages. They forget who is the one that actually shows the grace. Is that not a story for all of us? So when we think about Jonah and his temper tantrums, And we think about the laborer from the vineyard that challenged the landowner, about the generosity of the landowner. One of the things that we got to look at is ask ourselves, what is the worldview that these people are holding? Is that worldview something that is internally focused, or is it something that is externally focused? Is the worldview taking into account that person's role within the world and within the mission of God and God's grace, or are they just thinking about what they want and they need and they think what is right? How do we see ourselves within the greater mission of God? And how do we feel when we see something that we think is an injustice in the world? Both Jonah and the parable with the landowner points again and again, it's not about what someone deserves. It's not about what we think someone deserves. It's about what you believe. What do you believe? What do you believe about God? What do you believe about your purpose in life? What do you believe about your role within the mission of God in this world? Especially if you're baptized and you call yourself a Christian, we are repairers of the breach, the scripture says. We are supposed to be reconciling all things to God. Sometimes that is very difficult, it's very complicated, and many times our environment and our society and the communities that we're a part of is really the belly of the well. There was an interesting article that was published on the 19th, a few days ago, in the New York Magazine, and it was written by Andrew Sullivan. In this article, one of the things that he challenges is about how we identify ourselves. How do we see ourselves within this world? And what shapes our worldviews and how we perceive things. Andrew writes, wonder what it's like to live in a tribal society, kind of like a tribal society like Jonah lived in, and also tribal societies that Jesus experienced too. Have you ever wondered what that was like? Well, guess what? We do. Andrew says we do. We live in a tribal system. He says, over the past couple of decades in America, the enduring, complicated divides of ideology, geography, party, class, religion, and race have mutated into something deeper, simpler to map, and therefore much more ominous. I don't just mean the rise of political polarization, although that's how it often expresses itself, nor the rise of political violence. The domestic terrorism of the late 1960s and 70s was far worse. Nor even this country's ancient black-white racial conflict, though its potency endures. I mean a new and compounding combination of all these differences into two coherent tribes, eerily balanced in political power, fighting not just to advance their own side, but to provoke, condemn, and defeat the other. I mean two tribes whose mutual incomprehension and loathing can drown out their love of country, each of whom scans current events almost entirely to see if they advance not so much their country's interests, but their own. I mean two tribes where one contains most racial minorities and the other is disproportionately white, where one tribe lives on the coasts and in the cities, and the other is scattered across a rural and ex-urban expanse, where one tribe holds on to traditional faith and the other is increasingly contemptuous of religion altogether, where one is viscerally nationalist and the other's outlook is increasingly global, where each dominates a major political party, and most dangerously, where both are growing in intensity as they move further apart. We live in tribes now. And with tribalism it becomes more difficult, more complicated to talk to each other. And if it's complicated and harder to talk to each other, then it's harder to participate in reconciliation. The title of the article is, "Can Our Democracy Survive Tribalism?" I got thinking about that and what he was saying, especially as next month we celebrate the 500th year of the Reformation, the dividing of the church, the splintering of Protestantism. Basically, if I don't like what's going on in this church, I'll go down the street and I'll create my own. How has our worldview, our identity and attitude, especially when it comes to around the whole thing of what makes us into tribes, how does this identity and attitude and worldview actually create idolatry and altars that we sacrifice at? We are like Jonah, ignoring God, and we are running to what we want and the kind of justice that fits our personal narratives. It's not about what someone deserves. It is about what you believe. What do you believe? Part of my research this week, I was held captive by Jonah underneath the plant that God created to give him cover. But there's also this quote, "Are we envious? Are we envious because of God's generosity, God giving grace?" The writer Mary Gordon, in her book Reading Jesus, calls this an impossible question, calling for an impossible honesty. We have to be honest. We have to be honest with ourselves and each other. Because yes, she writes, "I'm envious because you are generous. I'm envious because my work has not been rewarded. I'm envious because someone got away with something. Envy has eaten out my heart. The darkness has overcome us. Our souls are being held prisoner. Do we have a right to be angry?" In the book of Jonah, God leaves that decision to Jonah. We have choices. We have free will. Are we going to be held captive by the darkness? Or are we going to look and follow the light? Amazingly, all of this was running through my head last night when Karen and we actually downloaded Wonder Woman. And we own it now, by the way. And we've watched it a number of times. And, add this to the list, Paula,
Yes.
Of all the movies, the theology of.
Yes.
So, yep. Theology for nerds. Theology of Guardians of the Galaxy. Also theology of Wonder Woman. In Wonder Woman, spoilers, by the way, spoilers. In the movie Wonder Woman, towards the end, there's this great epic battle in the midst of the darkness. It is the battle between Wonder Woman, Diana, who has found out that she is also a god, like Ares, the god of war, and they're battling each other. They are Ares is telling Wonder Woman, "You are a god. These humans, these creatures do not deserve you. They do not deserve your protection." And Ares is trying to get Wonder Woman over on his side to obliterate humanity, to destroy humanity, because humanity is imperfect, humanity is full of hatred, humanity has chosen war. Ares never made them choose war. He gave them opportunities, and humanity always took the opportunities and chose hate and war. And so Ares says, because of that, they should be destroyed. Let us move back to create the perfect world before Zeus created humans. there is that point that Wonder Woman has to make a choice. She's there in the moment. And she thinks about the relationships that she has had with these men. And she remembers the good stuff, the selfless stuff that people have done, that she has witnessed. And so she counters to Ares as she is becoming Wonder Woman. You know, she's become very godlike. And she tells Ares, it's not about what they deserve. It's not about what they deserve. It's about what you believe. And Diana, Wonder Woman, says, and I believe in love. She has hope for humanity. She is filled with grace. She can see all the light. She says that in all humans, all people, we are filled to the brim with light. But yes, we struggle with that shard of darkness. And she says, I quote, only love can truly save the world. I choose love. It's not about what someone deserves. It's about what we believe. What do you believe in? Our attitude and our worldviews are rooted. We have roots. We have to decide what we believe in and how we are going to participate in the mission of God. How are we going to root ourselves in a way so that we can actually be in that position to forgive and engage and work towards reconciliation? You get to choose. You have homework. I want you to think about today, especially as the football games are playing, about the take the knee movement. I want you to set aside whatever you think somebody deserves, or what you think is right, or what should happen. I want you to get into the reason why this is an issue and this is a conflict. I want you to dig in. What is it actually that they're protesting? What does flag law actually say? What does the flag code actually say about respecting the flag or the anthem or anything like that? Get into the roots. Look at the arguments. But in the end, what do people deserve? And where are you going to root your position if you are a Christian and working towards the reconciliation of all things? Does it not mean that you have to set everything aside to actually listen and hear? And then listen for what God is saying to you. The peace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you.
Also with you.